So how would we know whether or not there is a benefit of education? So as I was saying, I don't really want to interpret the cross-country evidence. I think it's very difficult to interpret. So I want to focus on one country. And there's one country that did almost the same thing that, that Turkey did. And fortunately for us, they did it not a few years ago, but many years ago. So now we can look at those kids as they are in the labor market, and we can see whether it was beneficial for them to be sent to these schools. So that country is Indonesia. Indonesia is an oil-producing country. So when there was a big oil shock in 1970, starting in 1973, for Indonesia, it was actually good news, because they were producing oil, so they became richer. And they decided that they were going to use this oil money to build a lot of schools. Basically, all the oil money the first few years went into building tons of schools. Tons means they built almost 62,000 schools all over the country, but particularly in places which had a low education enrollment. So if you ultimate top-down. Furthermore, what is interesting in relationship with Turkey is that they had exactly the same objective, which is they wanted the kids to learn Bahasa Indonesia. That's the language for the country, even people in the outlying island and stuff like that. And they wanted everyone to learn the state ideology, which was the Pancasila. It's kind of halfway between an ideology and a religion that Suharto was keen on. So it was entirely pushed by public effort. So it's exactly your cases of, like, if it was going to fail, then this was going to fail. And what do we see? So these graphs are the number of schools that were built in a region. And this is the difference between the education of the young cohort who benefited from the school and the education of the old guys who didn't benefit. So you see that in general, it's always positive because education went up over time between the young and the old. That makes sense. But it is also increasing in slope. That is, places which got more schools got more years of education. Maybe that's not surprising because that's almost a mechanical result of putting schools. But this graph is an interesting one. I'm now looking at the wages of people in 1995. Difference between the wages of the young minus the wages of the old. And so this is now they are all negative because old people have more experience, so they tend to make more money. But what is interesting here is not the negative thing, it's the slope again. The slope is again positive. So it is saying that compared to the old guys, the young people benefit more in places which built more schools. And it's very difficult to think of a story why it would be the case, except that they benefited from the education. So it seems to be the case that parachuting more schools to communities increase years of education, increase wages, and that seems to imply that education increases wages. And in fact, if you put 2 and 2 together, you find that the effect of education on wages is about 8%. You can use similar experiments to look at the non-monetary effect of education. So Taiwan, around the same time, a little bit before, also did a top-down drive to increase education. What they did is compulsory education. And what you find in 1968, and what you find is compulsory education in Taiwan led to an increase of education. That's not surprising. But also a reduction in infant mortality in places where education increased more as a result. So again, these are the non-monetary benefits. Nigeria did the same thing as Indonesia for the same type of reasons. They used their oil money to build schools. Again, they build more schools in some regions than some others. And again, you can compare the changes in infant mortality and in fertility and in wages in places where they built more schools and in places where they built fewer schools. And the more schools they built, the higher the education, the higher the wages, the lower the fertility, the lower the infant mortality. So the bottom line, when we do look at specific top-down policies, is that they actually are useful, that it seems to be that there is a return to education, corresponding to about 8% increase in wages for every extra year that you spend in school. So when we look at the thing in detail, and we answer this question, we think, yes, there is a benefit of education. What we are going to do next is to say, well, is the benefit as high as it could be? And that's where we are going to see the limits of this kind of things having to do with the quality of education, the motivation of the teachers, the motivation of the parents, etc., which we'll do next time.